I hadn't meant to stay in her apartment that long, but time, like the soft hum of the radiator, had a way of stretching when she was near. She stood by the half-open window, the faint chill slipping past the glass, brushing against the nape of her neck. The sunlight caught her hair just so, strands glinting gold and brown in a way that made it impossible to look away. "Close the window," she said, voice calm but carrying an edge, almost teasing. "It's cold." I glanced at her, feeling the weight behind that simple request. The curve of her lips, the tilt of her head, the subtle way her hand lingered on the windowsill. It was all deliberate, though she wouldn't admit it. I smiled, quiet, careful, letting the words hang just long enough before I answered. "Then let me warm you up." The moment stretched, suspended between us, almost too loud in the quiet room. I could feel the heat of her presence, even across the small distance. Her perfume, soft, earthy, something floral tucked beneath the day's scent of laundry, drifted toward me. It was familiar and foreign all at once, and I realized my hands were slightly trembling, though I tried to cover it by pressing them against my thighs. She turned toward me slowly, eyes catching the sunlight and holding mine longer than necessary. I wanted to say something, anything, but found that words weren't enough. Instead, I watched how her fingers twitched, brushing against the edge of the curtain as if she were gathering courage from it. The smallest movement, but it made my chest tighten. "Do you always talk like that?" she asked, voice soft now, almost a whisper. "Sometimes," I said, the corners of my mouth tipping up despite myself. I stepped closer, careful not to close the distance too abruptly. My shoulder brushed hers, not intentionally, or maybe intentionally enough that it made us both aware. The air between us seemed to hum, charged, fragile, waiting for permission or denial. Her smile was faint, knowing, like she held a secret I wasn't allowed to uncover just yet. And yet, I felt seen, more than I'd felt in years, really seen, and it left me strangely exposed. My eyes traced the line of her jaw, the way her hair fell just past her collarbone, the subtle arch of her back as she leaned slightly toward the window. For a moment, neither of us moved. A quiet shiver passed through me, whether from the chill or from the nearness of her, I couldn't tell. I wanted to reach for her hand, brush it lightly, see if she'd let me linger there. The thought alone was almost too much, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Then, just as I was about to speak again, the hallway door creaked open. We both froze, our eyes snapping toward the sound. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. A neighbor returning, or something else. I couldn't tell, and neither could she. But the sudden intrusion made the charged space between us tighten further. Her gaze lingered on mine, a question unspoken, a challenge unvoiced. I swallowed, feeling the taste of tension and anticipation mingling on my tongue. And just like that, the room felt impossibly small, impossibly intimate, impossibly ours, if only for a moment. The door opened wider. Someone, or something, was coming, and the silence that had held us captive shattered. I didn't know how long we stood there after the door clicked shut behind the unexpected visitor. The quiet that returned wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, layered with all the things neither of us dared to say. Her eyes flicked toward mine again, quick, almost shy, though she masked it with that effortless composure she always carried. She had a way of holding herself that made it impossible to tell where confidence ended and vulnerability began. I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. "I don't usually have people linger here," she said, voice soft, almost casual, yet carrying an undertone I could feel in my chest. I wanted to tell her I didn't usually linger anywhere, but that would have been too revealing. Instead, I kept my gaze steady, careful, like I was trying to memorize the curve of her shoulder, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyes caught the light. There was a pause, just long enough for both of us to sense the distance we weren't crossing. I remembered the stories she had hinted at, years of careful living, relationships that left marks she didn't share. And I, barely 20, had my own scars, loneliness, uncertainty, the quiet ache of being unseen in a world that expected me to grow up too fast. Maybe that's why I was drawn to her. Maybe that's why she lingered. Her hand brushed against mine as she reached for a book on the shelf, not an accidental touch. I felt the warmth of her fingers, the way her skin pressed lightly against mine, and for a moment, I swore the room had shrunk even smaller, every sound louder, every breath closer. We both knew the complications. People would notice. Friends might judge. Society has a way of labeling curiosity as scandal. Yet none of that seemed to matter in the quiet of her apartment. With sunlight pooling on the floor and the faint scent of her perfume wrapping around me like a whisper. She turned to me, and I caught the way her gaze lingered, the barest hint of longing behind her practiced calm. I wanted to lean closer, to let the words I couldn't say pass through a touch, a sigh, a shared moment. But she stepped back ever so slightly, a retreat that drew me in all the more, like a tide pulling me towards something forbidden yet undeniable. I cleared my throat, pretending to focus on the book she held, but I could still feel the electricity in the space between us. And then, in a gesture too small to be anything but meaningful, she rested her hand briefly on my arm. Not a handshake, not a casual touch, but a pause that spoke volumes. A quiet acknowledgement that this tension, this attraction, wasn't just mine to bear. For the first time, the room felt like ours. Not completely, not safely, but enough. Enough for the unsaid to thrum like a heartbeat in the quiet. Enough for me to realize that whatever risk existed, whatever the world outside might think, something undeniable had begun here. And just like that, the air between us thickened, charged, and impossible to ignore. The apartment was quiet, but quiet in a way that felt dangerous, like silence had weight. She was rearranging some papers on the desk when my phone buzzed. A message from a friend I barely knew. Meaningless words, but it snapped me out of the bubble we'd created. I glanced up, and her eyes met mine. There was something in her gaze, a flicker, almost panic, as though she, too, feared discovery. I wanted to say something, to bridge the sudden tension, but my words caught in my throat. She moved closer, leaning over the desk, the heat of her shoulder brushing mine, and I felt the tremor in my fingers again. Her scent, the subtle mix of lavender and something uniquely hers, hit me, and I swallowed hard, aware of how dangerously near we were. "Do you always check your phone so quickly?" she asked, a playful edge hiding something more serious. "Only when I'm distracted," I replied, my voice uneven, my pulse racing. I could feel her looking at me, really looking, and it made me acutely aware of every inch between us. There was a beat, long enough for my mind to spiral, short enough to feel like the world might collapse if we moved too fast. I wanted to reach for her face, trace the line of her jaw, lean in, and the sound of the mailbox clicking interrupted us. Both of us flinched, a shared, silent acknowledgement that the world outside was always watching, always waiting to pull us back into caution. I could see it in her eyes, the pull between desire and restraint, the knowledge that we weren't meant to cross certain lines, yet craving them anyway. She bent slightly to retrieve a file, and our fingers brushed. Not accidental. Her hand lingered just long enough that I could feel the electricity shooting up my arm, a current neither of us wanted to name aloud. My chest tightened, heart hammering in my ears, every nerve screaming that something was about to change. I held my breath, measuring her response. She didn't pull away immediately, and that hesitation, just a fraction of a second, but long enough, was all it took to bring us dangerously close. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her lips, the subtle rise and fall of her chest against mine. Close enough that I wanted to confess everything I hadn't dared to admit. How often I thought of her, how impossible she was, how much I wanted her. And yet, nothing moved. She stepped back finally, but not fully, leaving the space between us smaller than it should have been. My hands itched to close it, to erase the careful distance we both tried to maintain. We stood there, tension vibrating between us, both of us aware that this moment would linger long after the interruption passed. Her gaze dropped, then flicked up, meeting mine again, and I thought I saw the same silent admission mirrored in her eyes. Desire, hesitation, risk. And yet, despite all the reasons we should step back, we didn't. Somehow, in the unspoken, in the charged silence and fleeting touches, we were closer than ever, closer than either of us wanted, or dared, to admit. I could feel it before I even realized. Her nearness had become unbearable. The quiet apartment seemed too small, too hot, too alive with everything we hadn't said. She was standing by the bookshelf again, pretending to study something, but her fingers kept brushing against mine, lingering just slightly, a subtle claim that made my chest ache. "I can't stop noticing you," I said, my voice lower than intended, and the words hung between us like smoke. I almost swallowed them back, but they were out. She froze, just for a second, her breath catching. Then she turned fully toward me, and I saw it. Conflict, curiosity, and something like fear flickering across her face. She stepped closer, and I felt the heat of her body, the soft brush of her hair against my cheek, as if the universe had decided to press us together. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice trembling, almost lost beneath the rush of our shared air. Her hand reached up, and with a gentleness that made my heart seize, she brushed a strand of hair from her face. I wanted to lean into that touch, wanted to let it lead somewhere I wasn't sure we were allowed to go. Her eyes searched mine, looking for answers I didn't have. I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the subtle hitch in her breath. Every nerve in me screamed to close the gap, to let my hands trace the line of her jaw, to draw her into a space where distance no longer mattered. And yet there was hesitation, a quiet awareness of everything at stake. My pulse raced, every heartbeat a drum in my ears, a warning and an invitation all at once. She stepped slightly closer, pressing her back almost imperceptibly against me, and I could feel the warmth of her, steady, intoxicating, almost dangerous. "Do you?" she began, then stopped, leaving the sentence suspended like a fragile thread. I didn't need her to finish it. I knew the question, felt it in the tremble of her lips, the way her fingers lingered at my arm. I leaned in slowly, not enough to close the distance fully, just enough to let her feel my breath against her cheek. "Yes," I murmured, barely audible, almost swallowed by the charged air. "I do." She shivered at the word, and something in me broke. Desire, longing, and a fear of what could happen collided all at once. I wanted to take the step, to erase hesitation, but the world outside, the rules, the judgment, the unspoken consequences, hovered like a shadow over us. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the room ceased to exist. Only the heat between us remained, the pull we couldn't resist, the promise of something irreversible. And then, just as my lips hovered a fraction of an inch from hers, a sound from the hallway made both of us flinch. The click of a lock, the faint echo of footsteps approaching. The moment shattered, leaving us suspended, breathless, closer than ever yet pulled back by circumstance. Her hand lingered on mine, her gaze locked with mine, and in that suspended second, everything unspoken was understood. The line was drawn, but we were both leaning toward it, hearts hammering, waiting for the point of no return. The apartment was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. I was organizing some papers when I noticed her standing near the window, the late afternoon light painting her in gold and shadow. She seemed different, hesitant, guarded. Something had shifted. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice low, almost shaking. My chest tightened immediately. Her tone had the weight of truth, the kind that pulls the floor out from under you. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my own voice steady, though I could feel it faltering. She hesitated, fingers twisting a corner of the curtain. Then she spoke, words tumbling out in a whisper I barely heard over the thundering of my heartbeat. Someone overheard us the other day. They know there's something between us." My stomach dropped. The intimacy we'd carved out, the careful secrecy, suddenly felt exposed, raw. I could see the conflict flicker across her face, fear, embarrassment, and that same flicker of longing that had kept me awake for nights. I started, but she cut me off, stepping closer, just close enough that the warmth of her body brushed mine. I felt it immediately, the subtle pressure, the electric pull, the awareness of every inch between us. My hands itched to reach for her, to hold her steady, to erase the tension hovering like a storm. Her eyes met mine, glinting with something I couldn't name, shame, perhaps, but also a daring spark. "I don't want anyone to ruin this, or us," she murmured, her lips barely moving, voice trembling. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing pulse. I wanted to say it aloud, the truth that had been pressing at my chest for weeks, that every glance, every brush of skin, every shared silence had pulled me deeper than I could admit. But instead, I let my hand linger near hers, fingertips almost touching. The electricity that passed between us said everything words could not. She moved slightly back, a deliberate step, and I noticed her hands trembling, brushing past me as she adjusted her sweater. My own fingers brushed her arm in response, a tentative, silent reassurance that mirrored the tension, pulling us closer even as we tried to respect boundaries. "I can't stop thinking about you," I whispered, not entirely sure she heard, not entirely sure I wanted anyone else to. She froze, eyes widening just a fraction, a flicker of fear and desire crossing her face. Then she let out a quiet, almost imperceptible breath, leaning toward me again, but stopping just shy of the line neither of us dared cross fully. The revelation, the risk, the exposure, it had changed the room, the air, the gravity of our attraction. What felt safe before now felt fragile, urgent, dangerous. And yet, in the midst of all that, we were drawn closer than ever, trembling on the edge of surrender. Her gaze lingered on mine, a silent question, and I realized we were standing at the threshold of a choice, one that would pull us past restraint and into something inevitable. The air between us vibrated with it. The moment of decision had arrived. The apartment seemed to shrink around us, the late afternoon light turning gold and shadow into something almost tangible, something that pressed against our skin. I could feel her breath, warm and shallow, brush against my cheek, and my pulse hammered in response. Every instinct in me screamed to close the gap, to erase the careful distance we had maintained for weeks. "I can't," she started, voice barely above a whisper, then faltered. Her hands hovered near mine, fingers twitching, hesitating, betraying the control she tried to hold. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I let my eyes trace the line of her jaw, the tilt of her neck, the tension in her shoulders. Every subtle movement was a confession. Every breath between us said what neither of us could yet voice. She shifted slightly, leaning into me just enough that I could feel the warmth of her body against mine. It was a delicate balance, not a step too far, not a retreat, just inches of intimacy that left me breathless. Her hand brushed mine again, this time intentionally, holding just a fraction longer than necessary. "I've been trying to fight it," she whispered, voice trembling, almost lost beneath the rush of our shared air. "But I can't." That was all I needed. I reached for her, slowly, carefully, letting my fingers trace the back of her hand, then up her arm. The contact was electric, charged with every stolen glance, every near touch, every shared heartbeat that had led us here. Her eyes softened, glimmering with emotion I couldn't name, relief, longing, surrender, and I felt my own walls crumble. The risk, the judgment, the fear of what others might think, all of it faded in the face of this undeniable truth. We leaned into each other slowly, cautiously, lips so close I could feel the warmth, hear the soft intake of her breath. My voice dropped, low, intimate. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she murmured, and that one word carried more weight than anything else. Enough to tip the balance. Enough to erase months of hesitation, restraint, and quiet longing. I closed the gap, brushing my lips against hers, not fully, not hurriedly, but with intention, with care, savoring the moment. Her fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, a mirrored need that had built over countless small touches and stolen glances. The world outside vanished. There was only the warmth, the proximity, the mutual acknowledgement of everything we had denied until now. When we finally pulled back, just enough to breathe, our foreheads rested together, eyes closed. The tension had dissolved into clarity, raw and human. We understood each other fully, not just the attraction, but the fear, the longing, the risk, the desire. No words were needed. Every brush of fingers, every lingering gaze, every tremor in our breath spoke volumes. We had crossed the line together, chosen each other in that small, messy, irrevocable way that made the world outside fade to nothing. For the first time, it felt possible to exist entirely in the moment, entirely in each other, and still, terrifyingly, wonderfully, be ourselves. The late evening light filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room in warm shades of gold and amber. We sat on the couch, shoulders brushing, hands intertwined without needing to speak. The apartment, once tense and charged with unspoken longing, now felt like a refuge, ours alone. She leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, a quiet sigh escaping her lips. I could feel her hair against my neck, the soft weight of her presence, and the subtle rise and fall of her breathing. I didn't dare move too fast. I wanted to savor this, the delicate balance of closeness and trust we had carved out over weeks of tension and near confessions. I wasn't sure we'd get here, she murmured, voice gentle, almost hesitant. I thought, maybe I'd have to stop myself. I tightened my grip on her hand, brushing my thumb across hers, grounding her and myself. I know, I whispered. But we did. We're here now. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and I saw it. The mixture of relief, warmth, and quiet wonder that mirrored my own feelings. There was no shame in her glance, no judgment in mine, just the shared understanding that we had chosen each other, fully aware of the risks, the whispers, the world outside that might never understand. We sat like that for a long while, letting the quiet stretch, letting the small intimacy speak louder than words ever could. Her head shifted against my chest, and I felt the gentle weight, the subtle tremble that told me she had let down walls she hadn't even realized she'd been holding up. "Do you ever think about everything we were avoiding?" she asked softly, fingers tracing idle patterns on my palm. "All the time," I admitted, "but I wouldn't change a thing. Not a single moment." Her lips curved into a slow, serene smile, and I leaned down to press my forehead to hers, a gentle, grounding kiss that carried all the emotion, all the acknowledgement of the journey we'd shared. The warmth, the human imperfection, the quiet acceptance. It was everything we had been holding back, now laid bare in a single, simple gesture. We didn't need grand declarations or dramatic confessions anymore. The subtle brush of our hands, the gentle sighs, the closeness that had once made our hearts pound with forbidden desire, these were enough. And in that quiet, charged space, we both understood that the age gap, the risks, the past fears, all of it mattered far less than the connection we'd finally allowed ourselves to embrace. She leaned back slightly, resting her head on my shoulder again, and I wrapped an arm around her, feeling the steady warmth, the soft curve of her against me. We stayed like that, letting the world fade, letting time slow, letting the intimacy settle into something real, human, and lasting. For the first time, it felt possible to exist simply as we were. Two people who had risked hesitation and fear, two people who had chosen closeness, and two hearts finally in sync. And as the evening deepened into night, I whispered softly, "I'm glad we didn't hold back." She smiled against my shoulder. "Neither am I. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?"